And now we have arrived to the final part of the Hundred Years' War. This series has had everything. It's been all over the place. And I'm really looking forward to just seeing the conclusion and just, yeah, overall, this has been a really beautifully done series. I just can't wait. Let's just get into it, guys. Let's watch the end of English France.
In our previous episode on the Hundred Years' War, we covered the Battle of Formigny in 1451 and the subsequent fall of English-controlled Normandy to Charles VII. That campaign showed just how capable France's professional military had become. The use of modern artillery and superior organisation led to a great victory over a numerically superior English force, a far cry from the days of Crécy and Agincourt. There were only two areas of France now under Lancastrian control, Calais and Gascony, but the latter, in Plantagenet control for 300 years, was firmly in the French king's sights. So let us finally conclude the 100 Years' War, tie a bow around the medieval age, and finish our series with the Battle of Castillon in 1453. Before we go any further, allow us to the Duke of Somerset's complete loss of northern France in such a blitzkrieg-like manner sent yet another political shockwave throughout England and pushed the kingdom closer to civil war. The Duke was briefly imprisoned in the Tower, and this internal strife only distracted the government from dealing with new problems on the continent. France was able to turn its efforts fully south towards Gascony with the victory. Back in 1449, local forces subordinate to Charles had already captured Cognac, Saint-Magrand, and Moulins. Meanwhile, the Count of Foix, a powerful magnate in the south of France, allied with the ascendant king in the same year and put his considerable military force to good use, capturing Guiche and 15 other castles. Despite this preliminary success, Gascony in its entirety would probably be far more difficult to capture and hold than Normandy. It had been a fief of the kings of England for over 3 centuries, compared to Normandy's 30 years, and most of the area's nobility and population still remained loyal to their longtime rulers. There were many reasons for this, but trade was a primary factor. Between 1445 and 1449, for example, wine exports to England reached never-before-seen heights. Gascon merchants and lords were making vast profits from their overlords and weren't keen to see the status quo change. Only 2 months after the fall of Cherbourg in October 1450, French forces opened the attack on Gascony by putting Jonzac under siege. The castle fell in short order, and the army marched south, clashing with a small Anglo-Gascon force outside Bordeaux and crushing it before withdrawing to Angoulême for the winter. Campaigning began again in spring 1451, and the French army quickly captured Montguyon after a short siege. From that point, just like in the fall of Normandy, Gascon castles fell very quickly. Blaye was captured on May 24th, followed by Bourg, Saint-Emilion, and Castillon in the 5 days after that. The speed of the conquest was made possible by strong French artillery, in addition to well-executed diplomacy and bribery, which undermined baronial resistance. A decisive instance of the latter occurred on June 23rd, when the central city of Bordeaux surrendered without a fight, as its mayor received a generous pension from the French king as a reward. Just over a month later, Bayonne too was captured, and the feuding English could do nothing but watch in horror as their last continental possession, save for Calais, slipped away. Unfortunately for the French, they hadn't learned from the Black Prince's mistake after the Treaty of Bretigny.
Taxation. Is that gonna come back? But, yeah, it goes to show you, just the artillery. We're kind of getting out of basically at the medieval era and, like, seeing the rise of artillery and how OP it is. It will remain. And just, yeah, the diplomacy of forming an alliance, just like Charles is arguably one of the best French kings. It's just his accomplishments, his reforms, like how could he not be considered a pretty decent king at least? Like he's great.
And started levying heavy taxation on the newly acquired Gascon territory in order to pay for its defense. Not surprisingly, this, along with the rapaciousness of French soldiers, meant that resentment immediately began to build. At the same time, the Kingdom of England was not prepared to let Gascony go without a fight, but military preparations were slow, impeded by a deteriorating political situation that seemed to reach its climax in early 1452. Richard of York owned vast estates on the Welsh borders, and it was there, while he was in Ireland, that the tenants rose up in revolt against Henry VI in February. The rebels persuaded their lord to return from his quasi-exile and put an end to the Queen's regime. An army quickly gathered around York when he crossed back into England, and he began moving towards London. The Lancastrians mustered a force of their own and faced off against York at Dartford. Rather than attacking, the Duke of York presented Henry with a list of grievances and demands, which included the arrest of Edmund Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, and York's bitter rival, who was accused of badly mismanaging the defence of France in previous years. The weak monarch initially agreed to the demands, but the power behind his throne, Margaret of Anjou, intervened and eventually forced York to back down and reaffirm his loyalty to the crown. Somerset was left in charge of the government. While this was going on, indentures had managed to raise an army of some 3,000 troops under the command of a 65-year-old John Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury. Setting the stage for his attack was the situation in Gascony. Unrest had turned to subterfuge, and envoys reached London in 1452, inviting the English back and offering to provide assistance if they returned. After English ships swept their French counterparts off the seas, Talbot audaciously sailed the long distance to Gascony and disembarked on the Medoc Peninsula on October 17th. Less than a week later, the pre-planned anti-French uprising in Bordeaux led to the city's capitulation. Most other castles in western Gascony fell by the end of the year, save a few holdouts. It was obvious that Talbot's bold attack had taken Charles VII totally by surprise, as his forces had been shifted to Normandy in order to counter a possible invasion there. The English received 4,000 additional troops and supplies from home during the winter, while Charles, enraged at the Gascon treachery, hurried to send advance forces south to reinforce those castles still under French control, while he prepared to lead an invasion of the recalcitrant province in person. In early June 1453, 4 separate smaller armies began to muster at different points along the frontier with Gascony, preparing to invade on multiple fronts. 2 southern armies assembled at Languedoc under the Count de Clermont and Gaston IV, Count of Foix, who prepared his forces nearby at Bienne. In the north, a 3rd army, commanded by Marshals de Jalons and Lohiac, readied to march from around Angoulême. Charles VII headed a strategic reserve army stationed in the Lusignan region. The king made sure that all of the contingents were well supplied with siege engines and gunpowder artillery, particularly the northern one at Angoulême, which was accompanied by Charles's artillery master Jean Bureau. The combined French advance began almost simultaneously in early June. In the south, Foix and Clermont marched in close cooperation from the start, moving north towards Bordeaux until the latter received a message from Talbot offering battle. Being close enough to help, Foix reinforced his comrade to face the challenge together, but this made the English commander withdraw to Bordeaux. The 2 forces subsequently split up and remained near the city in order to deal with any English sally. The Northern Army, meanwhile, began a methodical thrust through the Dordogne Valley, approaching the city of Castillon from the east in mid-July 1453. When Charles heard of the army's progress at his base at Saint-Jean d'Angely, the king ordered it to besiege the city, which was at the time held by about 50 men-at-arms and 350 archers. In contrast, the assaulting army was a relatively standard one, about 8,000 men strong, but with an especially formidable siege train. Castillon itself was a strongly fortified town, with the fast-flowing Dordogne River in the south, running east to west, and extensive forests to the north. In a clearing on the edge of this woodland, surrounded on three sides by trees, was the Priory of Saint-Florent, located on elevated ground. Rather than encircling and cutting off Castillon with fortifications, as in a traditionally conducted siege, Jean Bureau, who was put in overall command of conducting the operation, didn't want to be trapped in a pincer between Talbot and the garrison if English forces moved to relieve the city. Instead, he sent 1,000 crossbowmen to hold the priory, while he supervised the army's 700 engineers in constructing a fortified artillery park on the plain of Cole, made up of 300 guns, both heavy and light, operated by 700 gunners. To protect the weapons, defensive ditches were dug on three sides, backed by raised earthen ramparts topped with formidable timber defences. To screen the open northern flank of his enclosure, Bureau sent 1,000 Bretons to hold the village of Castillon. In Bordeaux, Talbot received an urgent letter from the English garrison in Castillon, which led to immense pressure from the Gascon city leaders to go out and relieve it. Possibly before he was ready, Talbot marched out with 6,000 English infantry, 2,000 Gascons, and 1,000 mounted archers and men-at-arms to do just that. After bypassing a few of their own towns, and marching through quiet, forested paths in the hills of Orable to maintain surprise, the aging Talbot's Anglo-Gascon vanguard of 1,300 mounted troops assembled near the priory at dawn on July 17, 1453. When formed up, they burst out from the forest and attacked the priory from an unexpected direction, killing 120 of the French missile troops and capturing it after a brief but fierce fight. The remainder were harried in their retreat by the English cavalry until some of their own horse came in support. With that, Talbot's forces were pushed back, but managed to get valuable information about Bureau's artillery enclosure, which was reported to the commander, whose main force had just reached the priory, its morale high from the vanguard's initial easy victory. Talbot initially decided not to follow up his attack immediately, believing that his troops needed to rest after the long march and initial skirmish. However, at the artillery park, Bureau was preparing for a fight by dismounting all of his horsemen and sending the horses away with their grooms. The movement of such a vast amount of horses kicked up a cloud of dust, which was spotted by the English scouts and misinterpreted as a French retreat. When they reported back to Talbot that the enemy army was getting away, the commander reversed his judgment and decided to resume the assault, against the advice of a capable subordinate.
Dang, I love it when you see like issues like that and mistakes come into play. Oh boy, this might be the undoing, huh?
Sir Thomas Everingham. It is said that the Earl swore to his personal chaplain that he would not hear the Christian Mass until he had defeated the French army. With promises of loot at the enemy camp given, Talbot led his arrayed army along the northern bank of the Dordogne towards Bureau's fortification, speeding ahead with his mounted advanced units, while the main body of infantry followed up in the rear. Their approach was spotted by French outriders, who reported the incoming force to Bureau, while they were also followed by some supply ships in the river. As the English vanguard turned 90 degrees left to face the artillery park, Bureau was in the process of concentrating his 300 small cannons, mainly culverins and rebeldequins, on the southern rampart, facing Talbot's vanguard. The latter ordered his troops to dismount and fight on foot, but the completely unarmoured English commander, who was unprotected because of his oath to never bear arms against Charles VII ever again, remained in the saddle. Once again, Everingham advised caution against attacking such a well-prepared position, instead suggesting that it be starved out. Talbot refused and overruled him, fearing that any hesitation might harm.
Dude, Talbot, listen to this guy. He knows what he gets it. Oh my goodness.
His reputation. Seeing that Bureau hadn't yet finished moving all the cannons, Talbot ordered Everingham to lead the first charge. With a cry of "St. George," he led the first attack, advancing across the field and assaulting the ramparts. At such close range, the French light artillery inflicted heavy casualties on Everingham's men, supposedly killing 6 men with a single shot. The leader himself managed to get to the top of the wall, but was shot and killed by one of the French culverins. Despite the losses, fighting on the artillery park's southern edge went on. The main body of several thousand Anglo-Gascon infantry was now coming up, whose commander, Lord Kendall, was ordered against the enclosure's right flank. Because the troops were coming in unit by unit, the attack commenced piecemeal, with contingents being fed into the fight as they arrived. Now reinforced by the infantry, Talbot's vanguard troops received a morale boost and attacked with renewed ferocity, inflicting casualties of their own, but suffering badly from the French culverin fire. Though Talbot's numbers were larger than Bureau's, the latter's strong fortification stalled the English attacks. After an hour of grinding and inconclusive combat on the ramparts, however, French forces were thinning, and those who remained tiring. But at that moment, the 1,000 Bretons marched onto the battlefield from the northern hills, having received a message from Bureau earlier in the day. While their footmen streamed into the fortified artillery park and reinforced the beleaguered defenders, the Breton cavalry swept around the eastern trenches and crashed into Talbot's exposed right wing. Wreathed in smoke and noise given off by the French gunpowder weapons, the English were taken totally by surprise. The aged
This whole idea that he made in terms of this defensive position with all this artillery, what did he call it, an artillery park or something like that? It was kind of really great, and the message he gave earlier came to save him. Man, this all worked out incredibly well, and it goes to show you, artillery really is OP, guys. As we know later on in history, artillery is a beast, and I really like just seeing an early development of it. This really was just, the French really did just get one over on the English by the end of this conflict, huh? Yeah, the English came out with the longbow, which was OP, and in response, the French came out with the artillery. Man, that's just, yeah.
Earl turned to meet the assault, but was wounded in the arm by a projectile. That wasn't the end of it. Seeing the English struck in the flank, French forces inside the fortification launched a counterattack from the front, some of them even remounting to do so. What happened next is unclear and varies in the sources, but it seems like Talbot's lines began to break, routing towards the Dordogne. While this happened, the commander himself rallied a small contingent alongside his son and acted as a rearguard so his army could get away. However, a cannon shot the Earl's horse out from under him and trapped its rider under it. A family legend claims that while trapped, Talbot urged his son to flee, stating, "Leave me, the day belongs to the enemy. There is no disgrace in flight. This is your first battle." In what was perhaps the last gasp of chivalry the medieval age had to offer, the son refused and was killed alongside his father, who died from an axe to the skull. When the English commander's banner fell, the army lost heart and totally collapsed. Some soldiers drowned attempting to cross the Dordogne at Rozon Ford. Others were run down by the victorious Breton horsemen, while about 1,000 found refuge in Castillon itself. The Anglo-Gascon casualties are uncertain, ranging from a low of 500 to a high of 4,000. while French losses were quite light in comparison. When John Bureau found Talbot's corpse on the field, he had the old soldier given a burial with full honours. Similarly, when his banner and collar of office were given to Charles VII, the king remarked, "God have mercy on a good knight." Talbot had never broken his oath. Castillon was taken on July 20th, and the French king even rode with his army to quell a small internal squabble. That strife was nothing compared to Gascony's, which, despite stubborn resistance, was falling one castle at a time. Bordeaux was put under siege, and 10 weeks later, after being strangled and battered from both land and sea, finally fell to Charles VII. On October 19, 1453, French banners were raised above the city, and the English in Gascony were forced to leave. No treaty was immediately signed, and few people at the time would have known it, but the 100 Years' War had come to an end at Castillon and Bordeaux. After more than a century of struggle, France's Valois kings had emerged victorious against often immensely unfavourable odds, and in the face of some appalling defeats. The impact of
Yeah, the French just had the ultimate comebacks, like multiple great comebacks, snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. And yeah, it's just so cool to see this is essentially the establishment of mainland France, free of England's, presence, like before, like completely, like drove them off. And yeah, it's so interesting and cool to see the French win, because mainly we watched like the Napoleonic Wars onward. At the end, the British came out on top in the long run of that conflict, but here, at least in the 100 Years' War, the French win. So yeah, just Charles VII, man. Great ruler. Like, this dude, like, saw it till the end. I'm impressed by him. I did not know about this man or that he existed, but now I automatically just really like him for what he accomplished.
the victory was profound, with some historians even suggesting that the monarchy's hard-won prestige set the French kingdom on its road to absolute monarchy. In England, the final defeat was to prove catastrophic. In late 1453, King Henry VI fell to catatonic schizophrenia and became unable to rule. 2 years later, his weakness as a king played a part in the outbreak of the Wars of the Roses. You can watch our video on the Wars of the Roses via the link in the description or by clicking the card in the top right corner. More videos on the histories of France and England are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, commenting.
So I think he's done for the most part. And yeah, the only really big thing I know about the War of the Roses is that it led way to, like, what was it, Henry the 7th or 8th? The one who killed some of his wives. He married and then, basically breaking away from the Catholic Church. That Henry. His family came out on top. And also what I know about the War of the Roses is, it inspired George R.R. Martin in his writing of Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire series, which I'm a huge fan of. It's like actually my favorite fantasy series, but so yeah, guys, what did I think about that whole series? I thought it was great. Like I said, I knew some things about this conflict. I did not know at all the specifics, and coming out more educated with greater insight into it, that's why I just love watching these videos. They are just, like, they're just great, man. And I just love seeing this because, like, again, it's like the constant shifting. It's like 1 minute England would be on top, next minute France, and then it kept going until the French eventually just overcame. And it was just so cool to see France, like, get destroyed and then immediately rebound and have several great comebacks. Like, it is just amazing. And I just think this conflict is so cool, seeing a bit more about England and France fighting against each other outside of Napoleon. So it's nice to see this epic rivalry between these two countries still go on. and I'm sure we'll cover more in the future. Overall, I really love this. Another great series, and I can't wait for more in the future. I will see you all when we start something new tomorrow. Bye, everyone.